Hello everyone, I'm Brian Coin Dragon and welcome back to Vox Adventures. As you can see, it's October. I've switched from the Wolfhound Dungeon Pack. Not gonna be doing Rhaegar, let's see. Okay, not allowed in this area. Here's Scroll of Phone. Probably telemarketers or something. I only got to start closing the door whenever I'm recording. Well, time to find shelter. Oh, jeez. Disposal. Right, and back to reading some article from Microsoft Ancient Lands. While we wait for the sun to go down. No, Force Crit. That's not Finder, that's Safari. Okay, we were last off at Leaders on Parade. Slaves at Sea. The life of a Roman galley slave was hard and often short. Oarsmen lived in the hold of the ship and were ripped when the captain demanded more speed. But in spite of their terrible treatment, galley slaves worked hard for their Roman masters. They were chained to their benches, knowing that if their ship was rammed, they would be the first to die. And then there's a clip from Ben-Hur, the 1959 screen adaptation. One of two, starring Charlton Heston. Ah. That's good. Well, nice to see something not creepy. Get back here, I need your blood. Don't want to waste a bat form. So maybe... Looks like I've got no choice. What is that? Gemstone quarry. Let's see, what's it look? Lapis lazuli right there. Okay, that spawn's still on cooldown, so... Guess we'll just have to swim. Oh, jeez. Oh, that means there's plenty of shelter here for a vampire. Right, now, continuing on our expedition through Microsoft Ancient Lands, which I began long before I started reading from this to you. The Bloody Arena. For more than 500 years, one of the greatest stadiums in the ancient world welcomed throngs of Romans to watch their favorite games. For the competitions held in the Flavian Amphitheatre today, known as the Colosseum, weren't like the Olympic Games in Greece. The entertainment staged there were brutal, bloody contests, and everything about the Colosseum was designed to make the show spectacular and amazing. A Place to Die. The game staged by Titus to open the Colosseum in 80 AD lasted 100 days and more than 9,000 animals were slaughtered, and that doesn't count the gladiators who died. Over the centuries, emperors and leading citizens staged ever more elaborate and expensive shows to keep Rome's citizens happy. To the delight of the crowds, men slaughtered animals, ravenous beasts stalked defenseless people, and teams of gladiators hacked and stabbed one another to death. Nice and tidy. The word arena comes from arena, the Latin word for sand. The Romans imported special fine sand from Egypt to cover the Colosseum floor, because it absorbed blood much better than the sand from nearby beaches. Mortal Kombat. 4 types of gladiators usually fought in the Colosseum. A nimble Retiarius, armed with a net and 3-pronged spear called a trident, often battled a slow but more heavily armored and better protected Murmello or Samnite. A Thracian called a small round shield, and a sword like a Retiarius. He depended on his speed and agility to stay alive. Everyone had their favorite type of gladiator, and some fighters became very famous. Fierce but futile. As shown in this mosaic, a gladiator's armor looked fierce, but it really offered little protection. Even if he had a helmet and a shield, a fighter's legs, chest, and abdomen were exposed to the slashing wounds, to the slashing swords and thrusting spears of his opponent. Religious sacrifice. Gladiator fights probably began in ancient times as part of funeral rights to important Romans. The first contests were only three pairs of were, the first contests were only three pairs of gladiators fought were held in Rome in 264 BC. But these small competitions later became spectacles. Even before the Colosseum was built, Julius Caesar honored a dead relative with fights between 320 pairs of gladiators. Trajan later staged battles between 5,000 pairs of gladiators, a whole army's worth of warriors. That's entertainment. By the time of the Colosseum in the 1st century AD, gladiator fights had become a savage spectator sport, and a handy and popular way to execute criminals and traitors. Killing Zoo. Gladiator and animal fights were the highlight of the great games in the Colosseum. When fights to the death between people got boring, animals were sent out to challenge the gladiators. Fights between men and animals were called rentions. It was tooth and claw against sword and shield, and the animals rarely won. Slaughterhouse. Animals were imported from all over the empire to put on shows for the crowds. Sometimes elephants with sharpened tusks fought one another. Lions and leopards were let loose against helpless human victims. Especially trained fighters mercilessly hunted down animals. Water fights. The Colosseum was truly a multi-purpose stadium. It could even be flooded so that gladiators could fight on ships. Thousands of combatants dyed the water red with their blood in huge imitation naval battles, staged to delight and wonder of the crowds. Beastly death. During the sea battles, gladiators couldn't escape death by leaping into the water because crocodiles sometimes swam around the ship, eager to eat those who fell overboard. The Romans thought of everything. Screen gladiators. Most gladiators didn't fight because they wanted to. Usually they were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, toughened by brutal training and forced to enter the ring. Many didn't live to fight twice. And then there's a clip from the Anthony Quinn movie Barabbas. The life of a gladiator. Most gladiators were prisoners of war, slaves, or criminals forced to fight for their lives. But a few men volunteered to do battle, because gladiators who fought well often became heroes. Surviving the brutal training and fights against more experienced warriors wasn't easy. However, many gladiators didn't make it past their first contest. Those who did lived in prison-like camps and could be bought and sold like racehorses by rich Romans who bet on their successes. Reigning champion. Most emperors just watched the gladiator fights, but Commodus shocked Rome by joining in the battles. He bragged that he fought more than 1,000 contestants, which as emperor he always won. Inside the Colosseum. People in ancient Rome enjoyed a trip to the arena as much as sports fans like going to games today. They especially liked watching a good fight, if it ended in a bloody death. And the biggest and best fights took place in Rome's Colosseum. Okay, I'll continue on. Death and burial. Death caught up with Romans early, at least by today's standards. Things left in graves and other evidence tells us that many people died before reaching the age of 50. Many young women died in childbirth, and about 1/3 of all children died in infancy. Even if people escaped childhood diseases and serious injuries, by the time they reached adulthood, they had seen the face of death many times. Take out the creeper first. Microsoft Ancient Lands also covers ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, but I've already read those. It also covers Mesoamerica, Babylon, Mesopotamia, ancient Western Europe. And as I said, I've already read those. And it's put on a trip to the dictionary. Tibetan, a native or inhabitant of Tibet. Geez, if Zombie or Latin knew about me doing that, I wonder if they'd make the day longer just so I can read more. Or maybe they wouldn't care. Slow. Must be very high up. And hold on to the dirt. Don't think I ever noticed that before. Thought I removed my armor. No, wait, why did I put it back on? Well, good thing I did. I think I'll wait until my truce with the monsters has been restored before I put the leggings in my backpack. Got an item crate. Oh jeez, you're creepy. Another creeper. Well, for those of you that complain that nothing ever happens in my videos, something's happening. Don't have a diamond key, so it's useless to me. But I think I'll hold on to it. Right, back to reading. Victims of Vesuvius. More than 2,000 people in the city of Pompeii never had a funeral, but they were buried and their grave lay undisturbed for almost 2,000 years. Caught huddling together to escape the ash and hot gas from Mount Vesuvius, they died in the houses and streets of the city and were swiftly buried beneath tons of ash. In just one day, Pompeii became a city of the dead. Frozen in time. Plaster casts made by archaeologists have preserved the appearance of many people who died in Pompeii. The casts sometimes show people caught fleeing the city in terror, trying to protect themselves and their families. Even pet dogs were trapped in the deadly ash. Searching for the afterlife. Like the legends of the ancient Greeks, Roman tradition said that a dead person's spirit had to cross the mysterious Black River Styx to get to the underworld. The only way to reach Hades was on a boat steered by Charon, the ferryman for the dead. To pay Charon's fee and make sure the spirit can continue its journey, relatives of a dead person left a coin in the body's mouth. Short life. Many Roman children died before they reached their teens. Here, a family grieved over a girl before taking her body to be cremated or buried. Funeral rites. The Romans didn't try to preserve the body of a dead person. In fact, they often cremated, burned the corpse, and stored the ashes in an urn. The funeral of an important person could be spectacular, however. After listening to speeches at the forum, the family led a large procession. Professional mourners accompanied by a loud band and people wearing wax masks of distinguished ancestors carried the body to the cemetery. There it was either burned or buried in a magnificent tomb. Ashes to ashes. Romans burned a corpse on a pyre. The grieving family and friends often added clones and other things that a spirit might need in the afterlife. Then the fire was put out with wine and the ashes were placed in an urn. A place for the dead. The Romans may have honored their dead, but they didn't want to keep them close by. Laws required bodies to be buried outside the city walls. So wealthy Romans built tombs along busy roads leading to Rome from other cities. Some graves were simple plots in the ground, but a wealthy person was often buried in a fancy stone coffin called a sarcophagus. Body in a bottle. The ashes of people who had been cremated were put in urns, usually made of marble, stone, or glass. Families often stored urns together in a columbarium, a room or chamber with niches to hold the urns. A cave of tombs. Just outside Rome, in mazes of underground passages called the catacombs, early Christians once placed thousands of bodies. They did not believe that cremation was proper, so they dug the tunnels to bury their dead. The bodies lay in niches in the walls, which were sealed with stone or clay tablets. Although some early popes and saints of the Christian church once were buried in the catacombs, many bodies were later moved to churches. Underground church. If they were all connected, the catacombs in Rome would stretch for at least 560 kilometers, equal to 350 miles. The burial niches and underground chapels, often beautifully decorated with wall paintings, were used for about 400 years. A noble death. Life was dangerous for many people in ancient times, but for gladiators, death was part of their everyday job. They could meet a swift end at the hand of a skilled opponent, or lie wounded on the red arena sand, begging to be spared. For the noisy, rowdy crowd, this was entertainment at its best. Picking up the pieces. A gladiator's last exit from the arena usually wasn't in an impressive funeral. He was carted away like an animal through the Porta Libertinaria, the gate of death. Peril in Pompeii. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath tons of ash and mud. For nearly 2,000 years, the towns lay undisturbed. Then archaeologists began uncovering the two ancient cities that had been frozen in time. Well, let's see here. Sun's going down in that direction, so I'll face myself that way. City-state to superpower. Rome fought its way up from a cluster of small villages in ancient times to a city-state that controlled Italy, and it finally became the magnificent capital of a vast empire. Under the leadership of great generals, such as Julius Caesar, its disciplined troops conquered almost every rival. By the 1st century AD, Rome ruled the ancient kingdoms of Egypt, Africa, Syria, and Greece, and even the wild barbarian lands of Europe. Twin founders. Archaeologists say that Rome became a city centuries ago, when villages clustered on 7 hills beside the Tiber River gradually grew into one town. The proud citizens of Rome told a more interesting story. They believed that Rome was founded by the twin sons of Mars, Romulus and Remus. Left to die by an evil king, they were rescued and raised by a wolf. But when Remus later made fun of a sacred ceremony, Romulus killed him and his name to the city, became the first king of Rome. Trojan legend. The Romans also believed that Aeneas, a prince who survived the Trojan War, had sailed to Italy after escaping from the burning city of Troy. In his epic poem, the Aeneid, the Latin poet Virgil told how Aeneas became the founder of a new race of people, the Romans. I'm putting the sound back on. Are we going in a circle? Seems possible. Hello? Well, that's as far as I'm going. I don't have a pickaxe with me, and I'm not about to port back to my house to make one. Actually, maybe going... Hello? That's public indecency. You must die! Why does it seem like October is almost the one that had or monsters out in the wilderness? Well, we're safe now. Unless some guardians start coming at me. Wonder how much farther it is to land. Time to submerge. Well, that's all for today. I'll be back next Thursday after the Thanksgiving season and the Thanksgiving weekend. I'm Brian Croydragon signing out. Dab!